Whoa, that's the wrong one. Wrong scene. That's how we're gonna start this off. Is the wrong scene. Hey folks, thanks for joining us today. Welcome. We are trying to change it up a little bit. Try out our YouTube live stream setup. Not sure if it's gonna be the permanent changeover from Twitch or anything. Just giving it a shot, so don't worry about anything like that. But thank you for joining us today. We do have a special guest, our friend Landon Thomas, who when we got on the call, I asked him if he had auditioned for one of those Netflix Viking TV shows. But now I think you're much better off in a pirate TV show. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing all right. I'm actually I'm working on a video game that's not strictly a pirate game, but the backstory of the protagonist is he used to be a pirate or something. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so kind of weird.
So is this like your work outfit? Is you just work as a VR AR pirate? I guess an AR pirate, not a VR pirate.
No, but I mean it's all the same. I've got, you know.
There you go. So before we dive into like questions and talking about different cool topics, we will have lots of other videos up there. So if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube already, click the bell icon, the like icon, whatever icons you see, just like click on them, because then you'll get more stuff like this all the time, which I know you all want. So with that said, I thought we would start somewhere a little bit more chill, because some of the other topics get real deep and kind of heavy, I think. So you had recently released this filter top, which I thought was pretty interesting. And do you want to?
Well, I haven't released it yet.
You haven't released it yet. Well, you sent it to me. That's basically a release, as far as I'm. Yeah. I posted it on Twitter, and I started charging people money for it. No, I'm just kidding.
As long as I get the kickback.
As long as you get the kickback. Do you want to? So it hasn't been released yet. Do you want to tell people what led you to build this filter top, and kind of high level what it is before we dive into it?
Yeah. So it's something that I had already sort of kind of built like one-offs of for projects that needed it. Basically, I mean, anytime you're using tops to pack data in, a lot of times that like it would be particle data. But now TouchDesigner has this point cloud viewer and importers and all of that, and so that streamlines that workflow and makes it less of this kind of this, you know, kind of more workaround or more advanced thing of like, because tops weren't really originally designed for that, but in a way it's like it's using tops as if they were chops for, you know, giving them positions and transforms, animations, what have you.
Yeah, because I guess just to interrupt quickly, like, so for folks that don't know the before time, because, you know, it is funny, Landon, there was a time when we were developing when there was no timer chop. And I think for a lot of folks coming in, there's going to be a time before point clouds and, you know, math top and stuff like that, where basically, like, if you were working with particles or any kind of environment where you were saving the data of that environment into a texture, like you're saying, you basically maybe had some chops, chop to top, but then you're basically writing shaders or doing like weird tricks to work with your data, process the data, and there wasn't really that many helpful tools. And it's like you're saying, it's only recently that point clouds as textures is becoming like a real thing, and now we got a lot of features and tools in the palette. But then also stuff like math.
It's like standardized it, you know. Yeah.
Exactly, and stuff like math top is a new one. I think we also have, do we have a limit top, I believe? There's a couple new tops that we got that were all basically their chop equivalents brought to math. Their chop equivalents brought to tops, just for doing like math generally on data sets.
Right, because Derivative was noticing that people were just doing this on their own anyway, and it's better, you know. And I'm sure Derivative was doing it on projects as well. Mm-hmm. So this is in the same vein of that, and so I think there's a good chance we could have it made into an official top.
And so what you did is you know, we saw math top, these other tops, and you were like, well, what's missing for me is essentially the top equivalent of filter chop. Is that correct to say?
Right. Yes, and even though I had done this before, and just kind of done these quick little thrown together things, somebody goes by JZ Labs on the TouchDesigner Discord had asked a question about that, and some other people had mentioned how it's really common to use a feedback top and a little feedback loop to do it, and I've done that in the past as well, and sometimes it's it's fine, doesn't matter, but it can introduce a lot of issues and give you really unexpected behavior, because it's not gonna give you the same results every single time, and sometimes you're gonna have to reset the feedback loop because you've got a bunch of garbage in it, and there's like numerical precision errors, and there's kind of in a feedback loop you can end up with like this residue. Oh yeah,
everyone who's done feedback loops knows that you get that 10% white sheen just over the whole thing, and you're like, I don't know about that.
Right.
Because I've also done.
If all you're doing is visual, it doesn't matter. But if it's but that can be the difference between your particle being like over here and over there.
Yeah. Because I've also I haven't tried that feedback version, but I remember before when I had to do this kind of process, I had made a couple cache tops, for as many frames as you want to blend together. Put them into a composite and then put that as like average mode or something like that, and that essentially takes it does a similar workflow where it takes a bunch of frames of data and then averages on the per pixel basis what you should be getting out of that data set. But you took it a different direction.
And that's no, it's the same direction. I just made it a little more compact, and so you don't have to, because I've done that with cache tops, and it's the same. It's the same as using this linear filter here that I put together, but it's just kind of harder to work with, because then you have to have a replicator to like if you want to make it adjustable and turn it into like a usable thing. But in a pinch, I would just throw down a couple, throw down a cache top and a couple cache selects and just kind of hard code it. But this also adds, what I did here is I also added a Gaussian weighted blur, which is more similar to what's actually going on the filter shop. And without seeing the code exactly, I can't replicate it, exactly, but.
And I guess for people wondering why even do this, the big thing is, not only are these large data sets only really workable and processable in TOPS because it's on the GPU. I don't know if anyone's tried to do something like a filter chop on 5,000 samples across a couple channels. That filter chop is getting mighty. That's probably going to be a couple milliseconds cook time at least, and you can't really have that kind of processing overhead just to filter a little bit of data inside of a project. So, one of the big reasons why you're seeing a lot of these processes moving towards TOPS is not really because there's some kind of it's texture, so it does blah, blah, blah. Really, the main goal is because we can move everything to the GPU. And moving all of these kinds of math, all of these kinds of data manipulations to the GPU means we can work on way bigger data sets on these big beefy RTX cards without ever having to tax any of our system at all.
Right, tens of thousands or millions of values simultaneously.
So do you have it pulled up? Do you want to share your screen? Or are you already sharing? I can switch over to the scene that we got.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, let me move over here. And before you actually dive in, we do have a question. Matt's asking. I have tried to filter over too many channels. How do you move that onto the GPU? So I would say, in most cases, if your data is already on the on the CPU in a chop, probably the best bet would be chop to top, right? Just convert it all into texture data as soon as possible. Yeah. And then from there, basically try and use all these tops and stay in tops for as long as possible. Until maybe the very last second when you need to, get out of that system.
Right, but if you're going to render it, then you don't even have to leave Topland or the GPU memory. If you need to say send it over a network or send it over, DMX for lighting control or whatever, then you're going to have to go back into chops. And there's a penalty for going from the CPU to the GPU or from chop to top and back again. And there's some ways to try to minimize that by adding some delay latency. I think that there's a next frame option on the top.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually,
you gain performance because you're adding latency, and lag.
And Matt's saying he went from top to filter back to top. So he is basically missing what you're building here, which is essentially this filter top, object.
Right.
So why don't we talk about this, and then maybe, depending on when you think you're going to release it, either we can show Matt like a side way that he can do it for now until you release it, or if you're thinking that release is like pretty imminent, then we'll tell him where to look for when you're about to release it.
Well, if it's Matt Reagan, I'll just send it to him. He's my neighbor.
It's not Matt Reagan. It's Matt Pinner.
Not Matt Reagan. Oh, okay. All right. Well, anyway, we're good. But part of it was we were talking about releasing it as part of your newsletter.
Let's do that. So let's do either like the next couple weeks then.
That's why I hadn't released it yet, because
you're putting the blame on me.
Posted
putting the blame on me.
Forums that nobody would see it.
No, I'm not putting the blame. I'm
not putting the blame on you. I was just waiting for the right time.
You heard it here first, folks. He was waiting for me on this. So we'll get it out real quick to you guys. Don't worry. And also we have a question from Dylan here who says that file monitor on the top right looks an awful lot like iStat. What is it? Is it a virtualized Windows running on a Mac?
They're
talking about your bar at the top, your hilarious situation.
Here. It's called X meters.
Hold on a sec. Sorry, your voice is duplicated. Let me. Hold on. There. Okay, sorry. The audio should be fixed in a second. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
It's called X meters. It shows you CPU, disk, network, memory, storage, and then I also have Libre hardware monitor for GPU monitoring, which is over in the taskbar here. So you get the temperatures and utilization, memory, and all that. So even though this is just for at a glance, just to see what's going on. But yeah, it looks a little ridiculous. This screen is 4K, but I set it to 1080p for the stream, so it looks like. So it normally wouldn't take up this much of my taskbar.
So with that said, do you want to dive in and explain a little bit what this is that you've got going on here?
Yeah.
And actually, I'm going to move to the other side of the screen, because I'm not in the parameters way. So talk us through.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm using a rectangle top just for a really simple test to visualize what this can do. Even though I think in a lot of cases you would use some TAC data, like a point cloud, which would look more like this. And I can test something like that. But visually, you can see how we're starting out with a rectangle, which I'm just doing some cheesy sine waves just to give the color, rotate it. And then I'm using a regular texture 3D top, and I had to use this replace single and replace index mode, and to set the cache size. But it's basically doing the same thing that a cache select would do, but a cache and cache select. You'd have to use them together. But there are advantages to using 3D textures because you can access them in a single pass, whereas like a texture 2D array or a cache, you generally have to run a shader pass for every single slice. But now with compute shaders, you can access a texture 3D all at once and do gather and scatter operations, things like that. This isn't necessarily the most optimized. It was something I put together, and you don't have to use compute shaders. You could just use pixel shaders, but typically these days I just work with compute shaders whenever possible. But there's two different versions of this. The first one is a linear, a blur or averaging, which would get you the same result as if you used a cache and a bunch of cache selects. The advantage here is that you don't have to manually put down a bunch of cache selects or script the replication of them. And then down below is the Gaussian version, which would give you similar results to the filter tops first type here, which is Gaussian, and it's got a bunch of others which I haven't implemented.
Well, left half box is the linear version. Yeah, left half box is just like fancy words for linear.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Then I did two of the of the options here.
So we do have a question here real quick, which is Chris is asking, what's the purpose of the cache top then? Does it have any advantages over text 3D? And I guess my approach would be, it really just depends on how you're working, because I think when you go into that text 3D space, you generally lose the ability to work with a lot of other tops, because only some tops really work with that 3D texture format. And generally, if you go with the text 3D, then you're probably ending up going into some shaders because, or you're doing texture instancing. Like, that's a good use of texture 3D, I think. But do you have any other thoughts on why cache top might be used over text 3D?
I would say that's the main advantage for using the cache and cache select tops, is that it's going to be easier to just prototype something with built-in operators with that. And once you start working in 3D textures, it's like there's a lot of potential for having it be very optimized. But you're pretty much going to be on your own. And if you even want even simple tops like the math top, like I don't believe work on it. I know there's only a handful.
Most ops don't work on
probably less than 5 operators that work on texture.
There's very few operators that work on texture, like 3D textures.
So like I would say, almost every top you're gonna plug it in. It'll say input must be is a 2D texture, and derivative would have to rewrite all of the tops to support it. And so and most of the people that know how to work with 3D textures know how to write their own shaders. So it's kind of this interesting.
Yeah, and so as Chris is saying, it's really just for how you want to access and use the data. So before we dive too much deeper into this, just so we have a high level kind of explanation of what's going on. Essentially, you have that rectangle flying across a screen at the beginning, and that would be somebody's content, or in this case, actually, it would probably be more towards data that somebody would be piping in. Then you have this texture 3D that you're filling up with the last, X number of frames of that rectangle or data kind of moving around. And
30 frames in this case.
So that's okay, cool. So you have 30 frames in that one, and then the 2 shaders after are essentially 2 different shaders that take those stack of frames that you have and either combine them or average them or whatever it is in a
just adds them together, divides it by the number.
Yeah, basically just averages them out, but in different ways. And the top one is more of a linear one, so every frame gets equal weight. And the second one, it looks like you're using that ramp input that you have there, like that little black to white ramp, as the weighting system that goes into the second shader.
Right. And you probably could use a ramp top probably, but I just wanted to know what I was putting into it, and so this is like a Gaussian function that I found on it.
Yeah, especially if you're trying to keep it accurate, using that probably makes more sense.
Right.
So here's a question. It's kind of an unrelated usage, but could folks use this tool even outside of actually, filtering some data? Could they make their own custom blurs out of this? Because it looks like you could feed in some crazy type of weighting system and get like some really trippy blur coming out of the second option.
Yeah. So this could be repurposed to do different types of blurs, and if you wanted to do like a conventional 2D image blur, then you probably want 2 passes. You do one for horizontal and then another for vertical. But that'd be the main difference. Because here it's just the only difference between doing just say like a horizontal blur on a 2D image is that here we're doing a blur like in Z in time.
True. Which could have its own cool effect. But it's almost like almost reminds me of Time Machine Top a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the built-in operators that will use the Texture 3D input. And so you could even combine it with that if
Hold on,
you wanted to.
Is that your custom? You got like, because for people that don't know, Landon, what is the word? There's a whole subreddit about this. You have like the fancy Windows Explorer. What do you call it? Go back to your Windows Explorer.
Oh yeah. Well, that was actually because of a conversation that we had one day. Where you were talking about File Explorer was gonna have tabs, and then they axed
Oh
the
man,
feature.
How do I get this? How do I get this on my setup? Is it called, what is it?
This is an add-on. It's called Tidy Tabs. This is gonna end up being like a shill for like every little utility I use.
Man, but you know what the word is? What do they call it when you do this to your like desktop? There's a word for it when you like theme it and do stuff. I don't know. Somebody in the chat, if chat knows, let me know what it's called. But I like it. So hold on. So Tidy Tabs. Okay, cool. I'm downloading that after. Let me tell you.
Yeah, I can find it. They also make a thing called Aquasnap, which will snap all my windows to other windows, like into the edges of the screen. Yeah, and it'll also let you do like the 4 corners.
But you can do that with Windows right now.
But it's very limited. Like it especially with multi-monitor setups, the built-in Windows stuff has a bunch of.
We got a lot of love. There's a lot of love in the chat. Colin is saying, Landon, I'm going to need a full write-up on your Windows setup ASAP. Dylan's saying, what else does this guy have in his arsenal? Chris has got a little star emoji face saying tabs. And Dylan's asking, what was the name of the GPU task monitor again?
The GPU one is called Libre Hardware Monitor, and which is a fork of some other open source hardware monitor that's dead. I want to say it's called Open Hardware Monitor, and that project died, and then somebody else forked it, and now it's being maintained. Here, let me do this.
Landon, I think we're gonna need a guest blog post on this bad boy. You're gonna need to take a screenshot of your setup.
I have a link down.
You're gonna need to put like Libre Hardware Monitor, Tidy Tabs, like the whole X meter. You're gonna need the whole kit and caboodle on there.
Okay. Yeah, because it's also themed. I have like this custom dark theme from Clio Desktop.
Is that the one you got on Gumroad?
Yes, it's on Gumroad, and they say updated like every new Windows release, like within like a week or two, they update all the themes. Let me tell you,
folks, this man, he pimps his ride. He does not. You're the like exhibit of our community.
I'm not gonna.
No comment. Okay, cool. Well, back to Filter Top, I think. So actually, you had plugged in that Overwatch clip.
Yeah, which this is an example of what it would do to a video clip.
It's kind of trippy.
Which is actually much harder to tell. If it was running on your own machine and you watched it for a while, you could see the difference between the linear and Gaussian. But anyway, I just wanted to show that you could do this and what type of effect it would give.
It's pretty cool, I think.
The linear gives it kind of a more feedbacky looking one. And then though the weighted one is a little bit smoother.
I could see people using that even outside of just like the pure data usage of making a weird, blurry kind of effect. And Ben's actually saying, I put a monitor on your monitor so you can monitor your monitor.
Yeah, there you go. well, actually, I would have to set thing up. One thing I could do is just pull up the particles GPU example, just because I don't have anything else ready to pull out.
And one thing I was going to ask is, what kind of parameters have you exposed? Because when we release this, how easy is it going to be for people to like mess around with it, add more frames, take away frames, do all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, so I'm not really going to take the time to turn it into a component, but most people that have been using TouchDesigner for at least a couple months could probably figure that out. So so that'll be easy enough. But right now, and I left some little comments on here. Yeah, cache size and step size will adjust the filter width in step. So if you wanted to make it a second and a half, you change the cache size to 90, wait for it to fill up. And now we've got 90 frames cooking away here. And now it's going to be really slow. Now it's some Paul stretch looking sort of thing where it gets real. But and then the step size, you probably don't want to change that because it's going to spread things out and make it kind of lower.
Yeah, well, especially in the data context, I don't see why you would ever want to change your step size. If you're trying to make a crazy effect, then maybe step size could be interesting.
Well, yeah, it's a performance of it. It's just you're sacrificing it, but because you're blurring through time, it's actually gonna if you turn up the step size, it's gonna make it look like it's a lower frame rate. So it's kind of weird, and then you'd have to interpolate after that.
And I'll definitely help put some notes in it just for new folks. We can do it together. I don't mind helping out a bit.
So hold on a second here.
And for folks in the chat, if you got any questions about what we're talking about, if this sounds cool, Landon is going to release it pretty soon. We'll send it out in a newsletter just so that y'all folks know where to get it, how to get it, and all that good stuff. But if this doesn't make any sense, let us know in the chat. If you have any questions for Landon about it, let us know. Because I think after we do a quick little demo here, we can probably start talking about some other interesting stuff that you've been working on too.
Yeah, I just want to plug this into a particle system to show you that it can work.
It will take
it'll take a while to load up. Yeah, that's because this can take up quite a bit of memory because it's gonna take whatever we plugged into it, like this 16 megabyte top of particle data, and it's gonna multiply it by 30 or however many frames you want to blur. So this one is a 480. So it's going to lag when the GPU is allocating a half a gigabyte.
I think that's to be expected. I do.
Yeah, but just a heads. Yeah, just a heads.
So I guess that's a good tip for people is to you basically want to kind of set the size of this filter top, and then just leave it.
So now we can see that all the particles at the bottom are being filtered and interpolated to swim back up to their starting position, which if that might be undesirable, but it's just biggest thing. But but if I were to do
the point cloud generator from the palette, because you can generate a quick cube and then just rotate it. That would be a lot easier
and then I can just show
than seeing leaves falling from the sky and then falling back up into the sky.
Well, in fact, let's even I don't use the palette much, but the new point cloud tools.
There's a whole section. If you go up a little bit, it's actually I'll move your face because it's under your face. There's a whole point cloud area. Go up a little bit. Go up. Go up. Go up.
There it is.
Yeah. So I think the generator will give you shapes, or at least a sphere. Oh, nice. And then there's a transform one that I think we can use to just do a abs time.frame rotation on it.
Yeah, and if people haven't already used this, you have to right click on. So normally it would look like this. Yeah. You right click it, go all the way down to the bottom is view as points, I guess, or you can press V.
And it's just good to remember, just because you can view it as points doesn't mean you have a SOP. Just because it looks like a SOP, it just means
right.
You're viewing the data from the texture in a nice little handy viewer so you can see that 3D data.
It's similar to the SOP viewer, but yeah, it's
And actually, I think, let me check really quick as you're making that example. I think we did a small blog post about that for folks if they don't know about that. Let me see if I can pull it up here while you're cooking that example.
One thing we can't do is we can't, or maybe, yeah, it's not going to work. You can try viewing a 3D texture as points, but nothing shows up. You'd have to pull a slice out of it.
Yeah. And that's going back to Chris's question earlier, which was like, the pros and cons of text 3D versus cache tops and stuff like that.
Yeah, like there's no built-in operator to just pull out a slice of a 3D texture to view it. Like it's like that's an easy shader to write. It's like a one-line shader, but it's like even for me, it's kind of annoying to have to do it. But whatever. Once you've done it a few times.
And I put a quick link in the chat for a blog post that we did a little while ago, which was just introducing folks to some of these point cloud features, some of the palette tools, how to do the little like right-click and view situation. So I highly recommend it. It's a super cool new workflow, especially like this combined with instancing now being able to go direct from tops and not needing to to go into chops anymore. Oh,
and that's how JZ Labs was planning to use it, because he had already been doing some things with chops and instancing. It was like a thing with dice that was inspired by that artist that does those portraits with the different phases of a die, of a six-sided die. But you're limited to what you can do in terms of all that data and chops. So.
And I like Dylan put a nice comment in the chat. He who orbits is not always SOP. I think that's a pretty good moniker to go for. But I think I'm just going to digress for like a second. I'm sorry, but it goes back to a really big thing that I've been saying a lot recently is to think about all of TouchDesigner families of operators not as these totally different things, just different representations of an underlying similar data set, which is a lot of numbers flying around down there. How they're structured sometimes is different, but moving from top to chop to SOP to DAT to chop, like all these things are basically just manipulating and moving the same data between some different visual formats. But I digress.
So you can see here, I'm just typing in values, and then the filter is moving them to that location.
Oh, I see. So you're just jumping. You're jumping the value.
Yeah, like I'm going from 2 back to 0, and you can see the weighted Gaussian has a bit of a an ease in, ease out. Whoops.
So I mean, this is really a good example of, because if folks would probably be familiar with, they got like some data coming in like MIDI or Connect. They put that filter chop there so that every time the value jumps too much, it kind of interpolates between them. And this is like exactly.
You can use it for debouncing, or but also just so you could work with with whole integer values and have it just kind of glide over there. But you can work with millions and
what would be cool for this, and I know I'm not saying you should do it. This is a call out to the community at large, but someone should build the Penner's easing curves into that ramp shader. Because then you can get all the ones like the bouncy ones, and because I think you have all the data that you would need here to use those Penner curves.
Yeah, I think David Braun did a bunch of.
Because he did it in a C++ chop, was it? I can't remember. No, I did it in the C++ chop a long time ago. He did it again recently, and I can't remember if he did tops or in chops.
Well, the good thing here is that you can for these weighted blurs here, you can just work with a static. You just generate a static set of pixels here, and it's just one for each frame. So it doesn't really matter. I mean, you could have a script chop that generates these weights for the Gaussian or whatever, because it's static. This doesn't cook. It's just used as a lookup, more or less.
Cool. Well, I think that's pretty exciting. Like, is there any other thing that you want to talk about with this one before we talk a little bit about kind of like the work you've been working on these days?
Yeah, so just to show you how, like, even though it's a compute shader, it might look a little weird if you haven't worked with those. It's just to show you it's relatively simple. There's not a lot of code here, and the main key here. This is not the Gaussian one because that one's a little bit more complex. But the key here is this loop where for z in the cache size. So this is like for every frame. So for every 30 of the frames, it takes the input and then it adds it to the output, and then it divides it by the number of frames or the cache size, and that's really all that's going on.
For folks that have never touched a compute shader but maybe have touched pixel shaders and stuff like that, like, would you give, if you had your top 3 like differences or top 3 things to remember the difference between pixel shader, compute shader?
Yeah. So the biggest thing, which is gonna be harder to get used to, and the fact that you're kind of on your own for determining this, is this dispatch size on the GLSL top. You have to set the dispatch size. And then in the shader, you have to set the local size. And when you multiply these numbers together, you end up with the number of pixels that you are doing work on, which is in a regular pixel shader, that's already determined for you, which makes it simpler to work with. But it's also it could be a performance. It's something where you could make something a lot more performant if you're working with a very small input and a very large output, and all you want to do is take the pixels from the input and scatter them into the larger output. Then you really only need to run as many threads as there are for your input, because you're only doing work on like the 5 pixels in the input. It's like we don't need to run our program on every pixel in the output if a bunch of them are just going to have no data in them. But with a compute shader, you can say I only want to run this for the size of the input.
Do me a favor, sorry, real quick. So that's one of the bypass all those data tops, because your screen sharing is looking mighty crazy right now, and I'm wondering if it's just like the text 3D, maybe those are just making the bandwidth go out of control, and it's like artifacting all over the place.
Oh yeah. Well, here, we'll just turn it.
Sorry, and you were saying, so in fact, that input versus output size is a big reason why you want to go to that compute shader route.
Yeah, and the fact that so in a regular pixel shader, the pixel that you're doing work on in the input, you have to write the output to the same location, and you don't have any choice in that matter. But with a compute shader, you could take a pixel or a particle or whatever in the input from a certain location, and then you can output it to a different location, which is similar to if you're just working with arrays of data in Python or a regular programming language for a CPU, where you can just, I'm going to take some data from this input array from this location, and then I'm going to output it into this, I'm going to place it in this location in this new array that I want. So compute shaders give you that capability, which once you get used to some of the the boilerplate around working with them, if you've been just dealing with kind of conventional programming and dealing with arrays, then you're going to be a lot more comfortable with them ultimately, rather than like, it's this weird shader paradigm that doesn't work like regular code.
Yeah, and I guess that's really the big thing, is if people are doing a lot of shaders and they're finding they're doing more and more purely data-based shaders, then it makes sense to like start looking at that compute shader road, taking a look and seeing what they can shake loose, because it really does open the doors when you're purely working with data and you're not just actually doing texture stuff anymore, that the compute shaders really like open up those doors for you.
Yeah, for if you're working with texture and image data, compute shaders, that's mainly for a perform. Like you might get performance optimizations out of that if depending on what you're doing. And there's been a lot of research on that. Like if you're like NVIDIA's new denoising tech is all using compute shaders and they can get huge speed gains from that. But there's a significant amount of work that you have to put in to start seeing those gains. So yeah.
So really only for those that are getting really deep into shaders for data. Yeah.
And there's some other edge cases on using it for for conventional stuff, but it's less common.
Cool. So now I think, is there any final thought you want to put in on this filter top? Like we said, you're going to release it soon. We'll make sure to put it up in our newsletters and make sure everyone hears about it and where to get it. Was there any final thought you want to put on that before we talk about some other stuff?
No, I don't think. No, I don't think so. Just you can watch out for it in your next newsletter or one soon anyway.
Cool. So now before we transition, actually, do you want to stop your screen sharing just to save some bandwidth? Then we'll get you as crisp as possible up in here. Oh, look at the crispness is coming back. Cool. So you've actually been doing a lot of interesting stuff lately. And to be honest, I don't know which way to... Okay, do you want to talk about that for a second? Because I don't know if you know... Well,
We're changing topics, so I'm changing.
Yeah, I almost stopped noticing that you were wearing a pirate hat for a while. But you've been kind of branching out, and I think there's two ways we can kind of talk about it. One of them is the industry side of like the branching out that you've been doing. And one of them is more on the technical side with like the fluids and, between TouchDesigner and Unity doing like all the SDF stuff. Like, do you have a preference on kind of where we steer it from here? Like, do you want to talk industry stuff first, or do you want to talk like technical fluids? Like, what's more exciting for you right now?
Well, I think because we just talked about some technical stuff, we'll talk about the industry before going back into something more technical, just to break it up a little bit.
The man after my own heart, always wants to talk about business. So it's been pretty interesting because I know you have been always in the background learning lots of tools. Like, you're always in TouchDesigner, but you're always on the Unity side of things, like seeing what's going on, learning it. And then it seems like over the last, 2 years, you've actually become like really sick at Unity as well. And that is
within a certain specialization, because it's a huge. I mean, any of these larger game engines are enormous. So I was working with Unreal Engine for a bit as well, and it's more about like about your ability to focus and communicate with the team you're working with. If you're working with the team, then it really is about these tools. But compared to TouchDesigner, Unity and Unreal Engine are very much like authoring tools, and the iteration times are much slower. But the capability that you have is and the extensibility and customizability is much larger, and the performance analysis tools and the ability to deploy on phones and game consoles and what have you is a huge benefit. But I always find myself going back to TouchDesigner whenever I need to do rapid prototyping, and of course, for working on things for installations and whatnot. So I'm finding how these things all fit together, and even though these game engines are adding some things that some tools like TouchDesigner and Notch have, I think there's still always there's gonna be a difference between these tools that are poising themselves as for rapid workflow and iteration, which is going to be limiting in some ways, but they work so fast for these quick iterations. So I think there's a big benefit to having that background having worked with TouchDesigner and tools like it, because I always have that in my back pocket versus someone that's like only worked in game engine and only knows like this slower workflow that's
because when it comes to this idea of authoring, you know, you're kind of talking about this idea of shipping an application, because you've actually been working on. Is it one game or a few games? I can't remember which one, because I've seen some screenshots that you've sent me, but I don't know if it was more than one, like actual game.
I'm working on visual effects for a game. It's called Divenheim, which is like this kind of like storybook psychological horror on the sea sort of game, but it's stylized in a way kind of like a play dead game, like Limbo or Inside, but also also kind of has gameplay similar to like Diablo or something, and you've got these kind of these
screenshots and stuff that you want to show.
Oh yeah, I can pull it up.
Yeah, if you want to screen share, I'll pull it up, because it's a really beautiful look, and I think this is where the interesting part comes in, especially when you were talking about the idea of specialization. Your specializations in Unity. It's not that you're like, oh, let me build like the keyboard controls for a fighting game. Like, you are really deep on the VFX and generative content in gaming, and that's kind of bringing you some work these days. Is that like a fair statement to put out? Yeah,
and that's something. So I've been moving towards the video game industry for about 2 years now. So it's not something that I just started doing overnight. Though it turned out to be like a pretty decent bet, like due to the pandemic and everything as well. But I was already working on this game before the pandemic hit, and all of that. And I would say I got out of like event work probably about a year ago, and was just working working mostly on installation work. And
like
then
permanent stuff.
I've just been, yeah, but I would say it took me like a good year and a half of learning how to work with Unity and just, you know, with like and with the game engine in general. The main difference in terms of me working with shaders a lot is that working with HLSL instead of GLSL. Though once I learned that, it's like it becomes very
like natural to move back and forth, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's like when you learn more than one language. I mean, they've got more in common than they have different in terms of they're both shader languages. And eventually, it's not really going to matter what shader language you use. Vulkan has support for HLSL. So, like, hypothetically, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but hypothetically, once TouchDesigner has support for Vulkan, which it will, because they're working on it. Like, they could add. Yeah, so it's like they could add support for HLSL, and it would just give you some more options and flexibility. And it's really it's like the most common, the most used shader language right now.
And for folks that don't know, like, what's the difference between GLSL, HLSL? Like, where did HLSL come from that, you know, GLSL was lacking or didn't come from, or something, you know?
So they were developed about the same time. HLSL used to be called CG, which was like C, the programming language was C for graphics. It's like uppercase C, lowercase g. And you'll still, and so that's like kind of the ancestor of HLSL, but you'll still see it where it's mentioned as such. And especially working with Unity, there's a lot of legacy support and shaders that are still technically written in CG, but that gets really, really muddy and as to what's CG and what's HLSL, but it's like 99% the exact same language. But that was developed by NVIDIA and Microsoft like at the same time, and one of them wanted to release it sooner, and so and I can't remember which, but Microsoft wanted to call it HLSL, and NVIDIA wanted to call it CG, but it's the same language more or less.
Classic.
And then the Kronos group, who made OpenGL and now Vulkan, they made GLSL, which is you know, even though it's got it's as a shader language, you know, it's got a lot in common. There's enough that's different that you have to do a lot of looking up for like translation tables of like how to convert, you know, between the two languages. But
so they're not just like the same language, but one of them is like the Apple and one of them is the Android. Like it's not that kind of situation. Like they're essentially different languages, but a lot of core concepts that are similar.
Yeah, and you can do the same things with them ultimately, but HLSL is a little bit more like C because it was kind of alternatively and formally known as C for graphics. It's like if you thought GLSL was like C, if you would program in C, the HLSL is even more like that. And if you want to do like, and I find like writing compute shaders in HLSL easier because you can use like bracket notation for reading and writing from arrays, whereas GLSL goes for a more like functional approach where everything, where if you're reading writing from image buffers, it calls it like image load store, and everything's a function, which some people are going to prefer that, and it really doesn't make a huge difference to me, honestly. But that's one of the hurdles in like, okay, well, I'm translating between these two languages. This one, you know, I need to use a function to read and write from, you know, from these textures, these images. But then in HLSL, I can just be like image in bracket coordinate and equals blah blah blah. But at the end of the day, it does this exact same thing.
Yeah. So it's really just like functional programming versus non-functional programming, like traditional programming.
Yeah, I would say in that specific case, it's going to be like that. But I wouldn't go so far to say that like GLSL is a functional programming language.
If you told a functional programmer, like one of those like Pascal folks, they're like, "Hey, GLSL is kind of functional," they'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
No, yeah. It's just for like you know, this specific set of like 8 functions. Kronos took a more functional approach versus in HLSL, it's a little bit more like a traditional C style approach. But honestly, they've also added a lot of, it's like GLSL's added a lot of things that HLSL's had. So they're more similar now than they ever were to. So anyway, I have this ready if you want to.
Yeah, you want to screen share, and then I'll switch over the little layout here we got. Also, you can show people your other Snapchat faces. There's one that's the circa me 2018, which is pretty good. That's a good one.
Oh, this one?
That's basically like me at the TouchDesigner Summit if TouchDesigner Summit was at Christmas time.
Or I think it's hard, so maybe Valentine's Day.
Or Valentine's Day, yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I thought it was like Christmas lights. Yeah, I guess if
it is kind of. It's a whole mishmash.
Yeah, it's got a lot of stuff going on.
It's all of the Hallmark holidays.
And we'll talk about this after in case people want to like do this shenanigans at home. We'll talk about the little Snapchat setup you got. But yeah, let's pull up that picture here just so folks can see, because this is a really like pretty looking game. And you sold me when you said stuff like Diablo. Like I'm like, yeah, it's like Diablo.
Yeah, that was.
Look it up. That is terrifying though. I don't know if we can like put that one on YouTube. That one is like actually terrifying.
Oh right. Well, are you? Can they still see me, or is it just the screen share?
No, they still see you. I don't even see the screen. Are you sharing the screen?
I have to here.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet.
It's a good thing I rated this not for kids.
Oh, good.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Now we got the screen. Okay, so this is the game that you're working on. It's called, and by working on, I mean like you're not like working on it yourself. You're like working with this company.
Yeah.
And like we were saying earlier, you're taking more of the VFX, real-time VFX kind of approach to your specialization in Unity.
Yeah. So these are videos on Twitter. They're not going to be the greatest quality, but this
They're
is
nice looking.
Just a preview of this is like one of the towns that
And you were saying like, was it you that was doing some of that water effects on the ground, on the water?
Concept art.
Were you telling me that you were doing some of the water stuff?
Yeah, so I'll pull up the prototype of the water magic effects. So it's going to have some kind of like Avatar: The Last Airbender water bending type effects in it. So that's another influence, but it's especially for these.
So it's a pretty looking game. Like it's not like some cheap. This ain't a cheap game. It looks like a nice quality game. It looks pretty high. I want those flamethrowers. I want flamethrowers on my boat.
Yeah, so there is some battle. Like it's not a multiplayer game, at least not this iteration of it. But you could see this is like kind of a development from like this was the early concept art into like really early prototypes like a couple years ago when I wasn't even involved in the project this early. But
it's pretty. It's a pretty one, I'll say.
But it's gonna have like sea monsters and things. You can hear. I mean, this is some other concept art. But some really talented people working on it, you know, like the lead creator as well as the concept artists, the writers, the 3D artists. But it's not going to release for probably about 2 years.
So it's one of those games where they've got some funding and they get to work on making the best game possible for like a while.
Yeah, but it's a a really small company and they don't want to sell out to a big publisher, but they might do a deal with the publisher or like the right investor. They might crowdfund it and self-publish. It's still kind of, you know, but they're very committed to the quality of the products more than anything, which I really respected. So even though it's like, and I'm working on it just a couple days a week, and it's a smaller thing, but here I can show you. Let's see what's maybe.
Yeah, and also switch you're terrifying me with that insane Snapchat.
I was trying. It's supposed to turn off when I close my mouth. No, I'm not gonna. I'm not. That was just
Landon
for
the waifu look.
Show.
That one's a good one.
Well, you know, there's all these.
Put some ones in the chat if you want to see Landon the waifu. That's a good one. I like this one too.
Oh, here we go. You raised the eyebrows.
Yeah.
Okay. So, this is one more video that's also showing some gameplay.
It's like Diablo but for boats.
Yeah, but there's also a bunch of monsters, but that's still in heavier development because of all the 3D art and mechanics. So that's not ready to show yet.
Yeah.
And really, what I'm working on isn't even ready to integrate into the game fully. It's just early prototypes. But let me pull it up here. So, well, actually, here I'm going to pull this up in TouchDesigner first to show you what my workflow was, because I started in TouchDesigner for this technique.
And I think that's really what's interesting is your workflow, and I think what a lot of people don't realize is how many of these techniques carry over between TouchDesigner and Unity, especially like in the context of what you're saying, which is, you know, working on the VFX and special effects side of things of the game.
But even if you're working with C++, open frameworks, processing, Rust, there's a lot of concepts and like design patterns and things that TouchDesigner can teach you about programming and data flow. And especially if you start getting into Python and you know into shaders, shader languages, there's a lot you'll find that can carry over. And when you're not sure about an idea and if it'll work or not, TouchDesigner's been a go-to for sketching out that idea, whether or not I'm planning on deploying it with TouchDesigner or not.
So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, so for this, it was nice because there's a fluid sim built into Touch. So even though I'm not using NVIDIA Flex fluid simulation in the game for portability reasons, it was really nice to have it in TouchDesigner, because then I could just plug it in and just test it with I didn't have to write a fluid sim to get this rendering. So I guess to start, I'm working on a fluid rendering system where it's like a fluid particle rendering. So I needed a way to convert the fluid particles into a format that I could then generate a triangle mesh with, so it would integrate with the rest of the render pipeline in the game. And there's NVIDIA Flex's demos, they use a screen space fluid rendering, which Yataro just released an example of that in TouchDesigner on his GitHub. So you could look at that as well. But there's pros and cons to that, with using screen space fluid versus this, which is you could call it world space in comparison, but really I'm generating an SDF from the particles. So it's like I'm going from particles, converting it to these distance fields, and then at that point you could ray march it or ray trace it, or in the case of this game, I'm then converting that to triangles. So
question for you before you dive into it is, do you have a quick example of what the final output looks like? Is it easy? Because then I think if people have the final output in their mind, then as we're stepping through,
we'll start with the result.
Yeah, so that's a teapot, and then it does funny stuff whenever you hit the button.
Yeah. So hold on a second here. Hold on, I have some keybinds here. Oh, it's because it's pods. Pods, guys, we're pods. There we go. So this is the Flex example that's built into TouchDesigner. I'm just rendering it with my particle conversion method, and then Vincent Uze's advanced GLSL workshop has a ray marching example. That was really helpful because then I can just view the assigned distance fields without having to replicate everything that I was working on in Unity back in TouchDesigner just to prove out. So now turned off gravity, turned gravity back on, and also of course before, in the times before there was an NVIDIA Flex top built in to TouchDesigner, you had Vincent Uze's Flex chop, and he's been working with it for at least a few years before it was ever in TouchDesigner.
Cool. So that's the final result we're getting to in this Touch project.
Yeah, which is in a that's it coming out of a render top. So this is here's the render top, and this is the
And is this the one that's rendered as triangles already?
No. So none of the mesh generation is in TouchDesigner. That's something that would be, it wouldn't be impossible to implement in TouchDesigner, but I would have to take a significantly different approach. And it wasn't really necessary to prototype this out. And I did want to see, I wanted to see how this looked a few different ways. And this is pretty straightforward. It's not like, I didn't go to the links to make it look like water. It just looks like Pepto-Bismol or something right now.
It's Pepto cannon on the boat.
And yeah. And so let's turn some of these on. I also have I have a little screenshot of what the workflow looks like without the whole network. So I can pull that up too. But but we can just step through it here. So we've got our flex container, which and then this flex top, which just gives us a point. It just gives us a point cloud, just like the point cloud top or whatnot. So we've got this exploded teapot of fluid, and then I'm using the point repack component that's in the palette, which is nice because here, let's view it as image. So we can see here, like the flex top, it has this it stores it in a 2D texture. But for the sake of this prototype, I repack this into
single line,
just a 1 pixel high. You could call it a one-dimensional texture, but it's technically not. But it's only a single pixel high. And then let's see, right, and then I cropped this because I was limiting this to 32,000 because I'm running on the non-commercial license because I haven't renewed lately.
Dun dun dun.
Sorry.
Self-docs.
But it
self-docs.
Is nice.
Could have just skipped the crop. Self-doxed.
But I do own a commercial TouchDesigner license. Yeah. I just haven't had a job, that I needed it for recently. But but it is also nice to know that if you only have a non-commercial license, they enable the ability to use textures that are larger in a single dimension, larger than 1280 pixels, just for this this type of use case exactly. So you can see this is 32,000. And then this is the sorting step, which is honestly pretty hard. It's pretty hard to see because there's so much data in here. But I prototyped this in 2 dimensions originally. And
what is that sorting step supposed to do? Like, how are you sorting those pixels?
So it's So it's taking all of the pixels or that are holding particle data in here, and then it's writing them into like buckets or bins. There was a discussion with David Braun in the TouchDesigner Discord about this. He's doing a similar thing for a flocking, like a bird flocking simulation. But the reason why you may need to sort your particles is really as a performance optimization, so that you don't have to loop through every particle for every other particle, which gets slow fast. It's kind of similar to sorting M&Ms by color, but the colors are representing the position, and then when we need all the particles within a certain area, like when you look for the neighbors of this particle, they're all pre-sorted by.
So it's almost like you took the 3D space and almost like voxelized it in a sense, where you basically just create these quantized, like, there's a bunch of stuff over here. Who are all the pixels in this quadrant? Who are all the pixels in this quadrant? Who are all, sorry, not pixels, who are all the particles in this quadrant, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what you mean by bucket.
Yeah, I'm going to lower. Yeah, so here, I'm lowering the resolution drastically so we can actually see what's going on here. So I've set the number of buckets to 8 by 8. And then this is each like slice of the texture here. And I can pull this up. When I pull this up in Unity, this will actually be Raymarch, which I could also do in TouchDesigner if I plug this into the Raymarcher, which is just nice to see this in 3D. Yeah. But you can see here we've got red, green, and blue. So it's red for X, green for Y, and blue for Z. So we can see how.
And you can almost see sorted from just by looking at it, like, the elements at the top are in a bucket that's farther back on the Z depth, whereas elements near the bottom left, because they have no blue, are like closer to that camera. Is that like accurate?
Yeah. So the the more blue, then the closer they are to the camera.
Sorry, yeah, but invert what I said. But essentially, like, you can almost see the buckets through the slice, like through the Z depth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like the one that has almost no blue in it is going to be the furthest one back, and then they all step forward. And I also I use another example that was in that same workshop by Vincent Jose, the atomic compaction example, which does something similar, but this takes it a step further into sorting it into these buckets. But it's basically just taking similar to what I said earlier, is something you might need compute shaders for. Is, you know, you've got this input where we've got all these particles that are in no particular
order, right? I mean, yeah, it's just it's a giant string of data.
And then I'm scattering them out into the places that I want them to go, so I can look them up later. And in fact, I use the time machine top as a really simple like slice, which I could have just it would have been better to do this. There we go. So I can actually move through the slices with this, which this isn't accurate or anything.
But just a quick and dirty.
Not how the time machine top is supposed to use. Yeah, and in fact, here I should just reset this. Whoops. Oh, right, because it's such really low resolution.
That's one teapot you got there.
There we go. So now you can actually kind of see. You can actually see the the teapot shape generally. So this should actually be a lot more helpful. And
oh, that's cool. So you're almost like slicing kind of through the teapot. Shape.
Yeah, and I don't know if this should read okay. I'm grabbing one slice, and now I'm using the point viewer to like see which slice I'm looking at, and you can see that it's vaguely like a teapot. Though it's a little noisy because these buckets are they're over full, so it's kind of randomly swapping out which particle gets into the bucket or not, which is less of a problem when the buckets are smaller, but then you wouldn't be able to see them very well. And then it actually jumps over here, well, I guess I should say, like, the output from this sort, so there's the particles that are sorted into their respective buckets, but there also needs to be another buffer which tells me how many particles are in each bucket.
Oh, interesting.
The totals, so that I know if there's only 4 particles in a bucket, that I only pull 4 particles out, and I don't just blindly blow through a bunch of empty.
Which is one of the huge time wasters, like you were saying earlier, of having to do a GLSL like pixel shader versus a compute shader when you're dealing with those different sizes. Sometimes you just end up running your code on like a million blank pixels for no reason.
Exactly. Which sometimes that's not a big deal, but sometimes you need that performance optimization, so where you're not doing work on empty pixels or null data. And this is I mean, I don't have to get too deep into all this, but I'll
yeah, and I would say save time, because we want to get to the Unity part pretty soon also, right?
Oh, yeah. And yeah, but just to show you just about the size, this is like the amount of code that's needed for the sort, which really isn't that much. And I've like commented every line with the intention that someone else.
You're a better man than most, I'll tell you that much. Commenting every line, folks. Do you see this? Commenting every line.
Well, I normally wouldn't do that. I would normally say don't comment every line. Like, for most of your code, you shouldn't have to comment every line. But because I was just working with some pretty low level compute shader madness, that like it was helpful for myself to do that. But it also helps me to explain it to other, explain it to other people and to explain it to myself when I'm trying to figure out the problem. But yeah, but a lot of code. A lot of code should be self-explanatory, but once you start getting into like low-level shader programming, it's really difficult to do that. But it's all about your audience. If you're working with a bunch of other GPU programmers, you probably don't need to comment every line of code. But yeah, it's you gotta know your audience. And sometimes that's like my future self when I'm tired and don't want to have to.
And you haven't looked at it in like 6 months. You're like, what is this? Like, what does this do again?
Yeah, exactly. So, and this isn't super obvious. So then I'm selecting these just because the way this network is laid out is not great, and I can refactor it. But I'm selecting the results from the sort, and then this actually doesn't show an output because I'm doing some things that TouchDesigner technically doesn't support, which is I'm using an integer texture format. So like when you're in a top, any top, doesn't matter what kind it is, you can go to the common tab and you can go down to pixel format, and this gives you a big list of 8-bit fix, RGBA, 32-bit this, 10-bit that, and you can choose just red and green or just alpha, yada yada. And there's float formats, and then there's also fixed, which is I don't know if it's the same as integer, but I think it gets stored that way. Anyway, there's no 32-bit integer or 32-bit fixed here. There's only 32-bit float. But these require an operation. The sort uses an image atomic add. And then the SDF generation uses image atomic max. It's similar to an atomic counter, which is supported in TouchDesigner, but and there are certainly ways to go about using those instead of this. But this was easier in the end to be scalable, and it was also how I wanted to implement it in the game. Anyway, so let me just.
Just
open this up. So one thing,
code. Like we can just keep moving through the network in general.
Okay. Well, the only thing I wanted to show you was that there's this list of offsets for the buckets. Because I have to loop through every particle that's in this bucket, and then generate a single sphere FCF for each particle. And I also have to do that for the neighboring buckets, so that you end up with a coherent coherent result. And so you can see the distance field here. So it's like the darker the value, then the less of a volume there is, and then the wider the more. But it tells you how far away you are from the surface or not. And there's also a blurring, smoothing step. And this I based off of an example. That's pretty simple. This is the same as an image blur, but it's just happening in 3D. And then,
like we were saying earlier, a lot of those tops natively don't support that 3D format. So even once you start, if you want to blur a 3D texture, you're like, oh boy, can't use blur top. Basically have to write your own.
Yeah, so it's here's a blur top. Input must be a 2D texture, and it's pretty. It's like a 5-line shader, and then you run it for each dimension X, Y, Z, and that's pretty much it. But that smooths out the spheres so that they're kind of like metaballs. So if you ever use the metaball SOP or metaballs in anything else, it's going to give you a similar result. But that is the gist of it.
So you do all this prototyping in TouchDesigner of making this SDF fluid simulation, and
and the point cloud viewers came in really clutch for just like I didn't have to write some custom point cloud viewer. Just at every step of the way, I could just pretty much right click on something and say view as points. Like, it doesn't matter which one it is. If it's if it has point data in it, I can just right click on it and say view as points. So that was really helpful for knowing if my code was like mangling the data or messing it up at like any stage of the way, which like you're not gonna get that indication unless you wrote some custom tool that
especially in something like Unity, right? Like Unity is basically you write code, you see it in the game.
Yeah. I mean, like they've been adding some newer tools, but even those, or like so I mean, like Unity has shader graph now and visual effects graph, but then Unreal Engine has blueprints. But you don't get a preview of the data on those nodes. Like in Unity shader graph, you get some of that, and with Unreal's material nodes, but it's not the same as with TouchDesigner, because with TouchDesigner, pretty much every node has a buffer attached to it, which is why you can get a preview of the data at every stage. Which it's a trade-off because those all use memory, and which is why sometimes people have to if they have a big top chain, they might have to optimize that all into one shader to save on memory. But it's really valuable before you get to that optimization step, to just be able to see what's going on every step of the way and not get caught up on trying to figure out what a problem was when the issue was 5 steps back.
And if we switch over to Unity now, so you have essentially this same thing implemented on the Unity side of things, and did you do it all in shader graph?
No. So shader graph is really for material shaders, not for compute shaders. So it's really just for so like in TouchDesigner, you've got materials. So and if you want to make a custom material in TouchDesigner, you've got the GLSL mat, and then you can
you want the vertex,
change the code here. Yeah, so what Unity shader graph does, and also what Unreal Engine's material nodes do, is they generate one of these, which is something you can't actually do that with nodes in TouchDesigner currently. You can't generate.
There's
this
a couple
code.
That some folks don't know though. If you put like a Fong or PBR mat.
Yeah. That's normally that's typically what you would want to do.
There's a few options where exactly like do what you're saying, which is you use the node-based thing.
You
it's
true.
Hit the update output shader, and then you actually get whatever the setup was that you had for that shader, but dumped out as code. But you can't really do that with other operators, which is I wouldn't say it's a huge bummer, because I've used this so few times. But I think for more advanced folks like you're talking about, especially when you get to the authoring stage of wrapping up, finishing, optimizing, and publishing an app, these kind of extensions and customizations are pretty useful.
But it's a trade-off. It's like the game engines don't have these rapid prototyping tools and so many deep, all this debug visualization stuff that's really easy and built in. They have some of it, but anyway, but it's a trade-off. Though I am using visual effects graph in Unity, which generates compute shaders, but only for particle simulations. And then Unreal has Niagara VFX, which is the same goals. It's for GPU particle simulations, and those eventually will branch out into more than particle simulations in the next couple of years. They've been saying.
But are you able to switch over to Unity? Yeah, here we go.
Yeah. So the fluid simulation is in visual effects graph, which is going to look pretty similar to shader graph in a lot of ways, but it's very domain specific to to particle simulations. And so you've got like a spawn and initialize, and then you've got these update stages.
I think for people who only know Unity as kind of like the game engine with a cool asset store, like they may have never seen VFX Graph or Shader Graph before. You know, is there a one sentence
it's really new.
description for what they're looking at here? Like, what are they seeing right now?
Yeah, so here.
And now they got that other one, Bolt, right? Bolt is the one that you were showing me.
Yeah, and so they have a visual scripting graph as well.
Are you using Vivaldi?
But this is
this guy.
Yeah, this is my. It has vertical tabs, which are just really nice, and you can just go nuts. And yeah, it's not a plugin or anything. It just works. So what am I looking for? This. So it's like you can do this sort of thing in TouchDesigner, like the particle example that's built into the palette. But this is like a domain specific tool for making that easy, flexible, and they've admittedly taken influence from tools like TouchDesigner and Houdini and other node-based tools. But it has these 4 contexts, which is, you know, how many particles do you want? What does the particle start with when it's born? How does it behave over time? And then how does it look? How is it rendered? And that's all vertical. And then there are also these horizontal operators, which are going to work a little bit more like
TouchDesigner operators, like
things in TouchDesigner. Yeah, but these are smaller than that. They're
smaller steps.
They're like, they're pretty much just they're like single lines of shader code. So it's like you can have like a texture sample node, and then a multiply, and then an add, and so it's like these would map to, like, these would be their own top, like each one of these text, these boxes, versus the operators that go left to right are they get compacted within a shader, and so.
Would you say, because right now we're talking about this example of particles, and that VFX Graph image talks about like spawning particles, but you can use VFX Graph for all kinds of stuff, right? Or is it mostly focused on particles?
It's currently just focused for particles. It's on their roadmap. On their roadmap, they plan volumetric simulation, and Niagara's the same, where like it's right now just does particles, but there's plans to have it do some things similar to what Notch would do, where you've got like fields, and you could do like, you know, smoke, fire simulations. Yeah. Neither of these tools do that yet, but they're planning on doing that. But you can see here, there's like you have gradients, and you have time as an input, and you could input mouse position, and whatever else. Subgraphs, which is going to be similar to having something in a base or a tux.
Time is an input, but is love an input? You know, Interstellar, you know what I'm talking about?
I mean, you could make it one, you could expose that as a property, and then just what love is.
Pablo has a question. I don't know if we'll have time to get to it, which is some info on how to use anisotropic texture array in FlexTop. But I think, because I want to get through this like with you, and then talk about just the general stuff. And then if we have time, Pablo, we'll try and come back to that.
Yeah, I know what he's talking about, though. So we're gonna move this out of the way.
And for your reference, Landon, our cameras are in the bottom right corner of your screen. It seemed like the least important part of the network.
All right.
So now this is essentially the same thing that you would prototype in TouchDesigner. You'd now brought over into and built in Unity, because that's where it's going to be like deployed in this game. Yeah,
which I've been working on for longer now, and it's a completely different fluid sim that's running in VFXgraph, which is called Fluvio FX. It was written by Lily Montaut. I don't know how to pronounce it. She runs a company called Think Squirrel, and she had an asset for a long time called Fluvio, which is like a CPU fluid simulation for Unity, but then she rewrote it to be GPU based and work with VFXgraph. And it's an open source project, and now I'm contributing to that because I've been working with it so much to keep it and to help keep it. And then instead of ray marching, this is using a marching cubes method to generate a mesh, which I can show you in a second. And then I was able to apply like just a regular fragment shader for this refraction water. So like I didn't even have, I modified it a bit, but I didn't even have to write the shader from scratch, which is
that's a big time savings.
Here. Let me and some of that has to do with like I'm writing like tools and components for like a team of game developers that are going to want to be working with stuff. So it's like I could use some screen space fluid rendering or something, like very few other people would be able to work with it or understand it or apply their existing. And even for myself, it would be like I would have to do everything custom. So it's like we've got the water in the game that's like the ocean surface, and if we want to have that be coherent with how like the water magic effects look, like they should probably be using the same shaders or like similar. And so you kind of got to go all or nothing. It's like if you're going to start ray marching stuff or do screen space fluids, you got to do all. You can then everything that's water in the game should probably be rendered with the same method. I'm going to show you the wire
because I think a lot of it sounds like you're really bringing that same approach of like why people hire TouchDesigner developers, and you found that same niche on the game side of things where, someone says, I need such and such kind of generative VFX tool, or I need this kind of little component that I can drop into the project. And I feel like a lot of people didn't really know that was something available on the Unity side of things without having to actually make a game. Because you're not touching any of the game logic, you're not touching any of like controls, like character, like you're really working
and I don't have the experience, I don't have enough experience with game development to tackle like a game of this scale and be like a full stack developer working on all the battle interactions and crap like that anyway. So I picked a pretty specific niche to
but I think it's a good one, right?
To translate some of the ideas.
Like I think particularly now that so much of the event industry, like we're talking about, like you were kind of getting out of events even earlier before COVID, back in last year or a year and a bit ago. That whole industry has been shaken up so hard that everyone's trying to figure out like, well, events probably won't be coming back for at least a few more months, if not till the end of the year. And
down on this, even though I was already working on it. Though I'm only working on it part time, it's a small. It's not the greatest pay like yet anyway. Like but I think but down the road, like I think the game.
Well, I think even on the bigger scale, right? Like I don't think the game industry's really slowed down that much over this COVID situation. I would almost say probably they had their obviously a hurdle in the road where it's like, oh my god, everybody's got to work from home. Like, how do we do that? But I would imagine their profits probably went up just because there's so many people at home now, basically, who didn't have, a time off from work or whatever the reason. But, people are buying games to play them. Netflix stock went through the roof. And I think this could be a really interesting avenue for people that are trying to look, whether it's now or in 6 months to kind of future-proof themselves from situations like this where the whole industry's like, guess what, like we can't go outside anymore. It could be an interesting...
Yeah, and on virtual production, Unreal Engine is more established in that industry, and the built-in tools are a bit more mature than Unity's for virtual production. In the next couple of years, like Unity will have implemented NDI support and for black magic and all that stuff. Like Unreal has some of that already.
Even those are kind of janky from what I've seen.
Yeah. Though it's not. You should take it with a grain of salt. Even though it doesn't matter whether it's Unreal or Unity, but let's just take the example of Unreal in the virtual production space. Like if you thought that setting up TouchDesigner for some Hollywood production virtual, some virtual production rig, was just going to be turnkey and easy with Unreal Engine. It's not. It's pretty DIY. Same way if you wanted to do that with TouchDesigner. There's just a lot of people doing it. So it's more about Unity and the people that are doing it. Same as you get these niches in TouchDesigner where TouchDesigner wasn't necessarily designed to do this, but they maybe added a few things. TouchDesigner's got the sync chop and quadro sync support. It's still it's not turnkey. You still really need to know what you're doing to get everything to work. And then Unity also you'd have to use some middleware. There's Middle VR does some stuff for cluster rendering, but Unity at this point has announced that they're working on clustered rendering, which Epic Unreal calls that end display, but Unity had to shelve theirs while they worked on they rewrote their render pipelines, and then in the next couple of years, then they're going to have their kind of version of end display out, whereas Unreal has already had it out, but it also still needs a lot of integration work. There's it's a lot. Don't expect any of these solutions, whether they're available or not, to be complete or perfect. But
well, I guess here's a question for you, because you've kind of been veering towards this game side of thing, taking those tools and skills you have from the TouchDesigner side of things, prototyping, and then building into more of this VFX for games or real-time effects for games. If you could reset, let's say 6 or 8 months, would you still go down the game road, or would you go towards virtual productions and those kind of areas of work?
I think I would still go down the game road, just because I was just looking for something that completely different that I hadn't done, that would feel a little bit that would feel more fresh rather than a different version of what I had already done. Though that's a riskier move in a lot of ways. And though I started that I started this 2 years ago, just branching out into game engines more. And part of the reason why I chose Unity was actually of all of the new tool, Unreal Engine has been more established in having a visual programming environment. They've had blueprints out for years. It's really it's stable and well documented and all of that. Unity's visual scripting and their shader graph and visual effect graph are not. They're very new. It's very even though some of these tools are production ready, they don't have all the features that you would have available by just writing code, or in the built-in render pipeline versus the new one. Mm-hmm. But I did that intentionally because to ride the wave of having new knowledge in an industry that people don't. So I just started learning stuff that I knew wasn't ready and was in alpha, beta, or whatever. So that by the time that it is ready, I'll be one of the only people that has significant experience with it. Yeah. Which just positions me into not having to work so hard to get a decent job. So, which is, well,
I think it's a really smart thing to do, and it almost reminds me of when we were all getting started.
I don't have to be the best of the best.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of when we were getting started in TouchDesigner. When I was getting my first gigs, I was by far not the best of the best, but I was kind of riding that wave of oh, this is new and people are into it, and it's not a field where everyone is super amazing at it yet, so I have a shot here. Now, obviously, it's different because totally. By this point in your career, you are so talented and smart and like know so much stuff. But it's that same kind of mentality of like you're riding.
It's all relative. It's still all relative.
Yeah, and you're riding this wave of like these things are gonna be hot for games soon.
Right.
And
just like the touch designer community exploded, but I like I wasn't riding the wave as early as you were, and a lot of other people. Like I started, I think right after TouchDesigner 88 came out.
Yeah.
And I did like an art installation.
Yeah.
With my...
Classic. But I think it's really interesting because it does put you in such a really good position in terms of career growth, I think, because everyone knows you on the touch designer side of things. Like everyone knows if they need like some crazy shader or some kind of like insane, multi GPU system, multi CPU system, they know they can come to Landon. He's got the experience, Obscura, AV&C, freelance, like you've been doing these big gigs. But now also you're bringing this new skill set towards games. And, do you think, so here's some hypotheticals, like in 1 year time, do you think you'll be working more on the game side of things or more on the touch designer installation side of things?
That's hard to say. I mean, some of it depends on like this particular game, like, and if they, what type of investment they end up landing, or if they make a deal with the publisher or not. Regardless, I'll have delivered some tools for their team to run with, whether or not like I am working with them, maintaining and consulting on those tools or not. And I still, I'm not walking away from like the AV installation and new media art space, though I was already minimizing the amount of event work I was doing just because it stresses me out, and some other people. It's
stressful, man.
Some people work better under that pressure, but I'm.
I mean, you've seen me in the hot seat. I'm good, but yeah. I don't like it. Like it's very stressful, and like all those nights where we basically are in the lobby of a place and we don't like get to ever go back to the hotel. Like it's not healthy over the long run. So. It's been getting better. It
was exciting. It was exciting and fun, but I also just wanted a break from that. But at the same time, people who have been seasoned in the gaming industry for a decade or more are really hungry to like work on totally. An art installation or an event or whatever. So some of them have the opposite thing where they're trying to translate their skills in programming or 3D art or whatever. Into our space. So I think it's cool to see that cross-pollination going on, and people, like there's a lot of grass is greener on the other side of the fence sort of things all across the industry in terms of what tools you're using or not using. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's about like, people and communication and teams more than it's about your tools.
So there was one other question I had before, if you wanted to show people the little Snapchat, Snapcam, whatever it's called, Snap filters. But I did have a question for you. Has there been any really interesting technique, thought process, ideas that working in games has brought back to just your general practice of like interactive, immersive, real-time work? Like, is there something that you had a certain way of thinking about it, you then started working with games, you're like, oh wow, these folks have like a really interesting and maybe even better way of approaching these kind of issues?
I would say teamwork is a big part of it, and just like massive teams and just like this scale. Even though I'm not working with a massive team at the moment, it's still more people than would usually be working on a touch designer project at the same time.
Which is like max
like
5. People. Yeah, max 5.
Yeah. Five is pushing it. Like you better your project better be pretty well compartmentalized.
Yeah, you need a full like custom Git workflow. Yeah, you need.
Right, and even that, in any software development scenario, there's a limit to how many cooks you can have in certain types of kitchens, So, but it's like whether you're using like a Git workflow or not, if you're changing the architecture all the time, then you're really limited. So,
and how is that
being able to think about that? I mean, it's been cool to like sometimes the project lead, like the head of the studio, will sometimes like bounce off ideas that the writer has been talking to him about, and just usually I'm not like used to like having a writer on the team. It's like and so it's been cool giving some feedback or being able to contribute to that, and like hear like the plot, like, oh, like here's this plot, because it's a very narrative, story based, like single player game. So it's been cool because I know all of the plot twists and the surprises, and that I gotta have to keep them secret for.
So is there a plot twist where you're in the game? Because that would be pretty good.
No, I'm the water, but I don't know. I mean,
He's the water. You heard it here first. I'm the water.
There is always a possibility to sneak something into the game assets, that some Easter egg where someone has to put some special combination of things to get some corny picture. That would be
Now,
maybe.
Do you want to show off this snap cam situation real quick, and then Pablo's question, depending on how long you think Pablo's anisotropic filtering question will take. How long do you think? Is it a long one? Or?
I can make it. I can.
You can give him the Coles notes.
I can make it short. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got the
Exactly. Yeah.
There you go. Now you're ready for Divenheim.
Yeah. Yeah. This one's called.
Wait. Do you have it on screen though? Like, if somebody wants to run this, how do they run this thing?
Oh yeah. They're going to move it over. So a lot of people have discovered this
Snap
recently.
Camera is the app.
And it's been available for a while. I don't know, maybe for a year or two. But Snapchat or Snap Inc. made a program called Snap Camera, which just runs Snapchat filters with a webcam driver, so you can use it with any application. You can use it with TouchDesigner. Hal Lovemelt.
Shout out, Mr. Lovemelt.
Working with Sushi Dragon, the Twitch streamer, who Sushi Dragon uses this, and so anyway, they
so then, do you have like, is your setup that your camera webcam goes direct to Snap Camera, and then Snap Camera is the webcam driver that you pick in something like Skype or TouchDesigner?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So what you do is you open up, so you can see here in the taskbar on the top right, where you need to make sure Snap Camera is running, and you can see here's the effect is on or off or whatever. And then in this case, Skype, which I'll just open it up. If I go down
at the top there. At the top.
Oh yeah, here we go. Yeah. So you can see here. So
oh God, you. What is going on? The Skype does not like that situation.
Oh no.
Oh God.
Sorry. All right, I'll switch back. But anyway, you selected.
Hold on. I think your mic got really quiet again.
Oh.
Did your mic change?
Hello.
Say something.
Hello.
Hold on a sec. I gotta rejig your Skype. Skype NDI was not pleased with what you did there.
Oh yeah, but it's because it probably switched devices. Because the Valve Index has its own microphone. Well, I know not to do that.
Yeah, and hold on. Say something.
Hello,
it got real quiet. Hold on a sec. I don't even see you on the Skype NDI anymore. Okay, leave your face big on your screen, because I can see you on the screen share. Oh, hold on. Let me try here.
What? You mean leave? I should.
Or leave something.
All right. Well, how about while you're figuring this out, I'll answer.
Okay, hold on. Let me crank up your gain in the meantime, because you got real quiet.
I'll try to get closer to the mic here.
Say some stuff.
Hello. Hear me?
Say more stuff.
Hello. Hi.
Okay, I think they should be able to hear. Folks, let us know in the chat if you can't hear Landon all right. But we definitely dumpstered.
Yeah, shout out.
F in the chat for Landon's stream.
Hey, at least I feel like we're on the later.
Yeah,
end
that's
of
good.
it
I'm
this
glad we
point,
didn't
so
do
at
this
least
at the
I messed
beginning.
it up.
Otherwise, it would have hang up and like recall in. Okay, I'm taking you. Oh jeez. Oh jeez. Okay, they hear us both. So talk to Pablo here about anisotropic filtering.
Well, so I believe he's talking about anisotropic scale, or what might also be called ellipsoid plotting, because normally when you're rendering particles, they're just little spheres. But when you're dealing with fluid and you want to have like you want to have like a smoother surface, the anisotropic scale turns them into beans, or ellipsoids, like an ellipse. So it flattens the spheres down according to the surface normals of the fluid. So that and then when you have to smooth it out, so I haven't done this. I haven't implemented this yet, and I could do this with my SDF based particle rendering as well, and it would make it so that like I don't have to smooth out and blur the image so much to get a good looking result. So it's a performance optimization as well, but it just also generally looks better. And the way to do it is once you have your whole flex solver set up, you put down another NVIDIA Flex top, and then you select the output here instead of position, velocity, yada yada. There's anisotropy. Well, I don't think we're getting an output from it right now. Maybe I have to the simulation run. But presumably here we would then get a bunch of vectors that represent scaling that sphere in X, Y, and Z. So it's like how long and how flat or how wide is the sphere going to be, like how bean shaped is it going to be or not, and in what direction and orientation. So you could use it with just with just instancing spheres in TouchDesigner, or you could use it with some other type of fluid rendering. But just anything that involves rendering the particle as a sphere, it'll flatten it out into this bean ellipsoid thing and make it look more like a fluid.
But then I think a quick thing is also try not to have too many of those spheres overlapping, because I think that's a common issue people see when instancing with Flex, is they'll have all of these different spheres all kind of like overlapping, and then the rendering just tanks performance wise when it has to do all the calculations for all these.
And that's one of the reasons why I also went with this method of generating an SDF, which can optionally generate a mesh. Is unlike screen space rendering, you can get really close to the fluid surface, and it won't affect performance really at all. It's like not any more than getting close to any other like mesh, because I'm not. It's not pixel bound. It's not running some operation on each pixel. It's
Pablo's asking how to use those textures and how to instance. I think those questions, Pablo, probably are best either if you post on the forum or on the Discord group for TouchDesigner. We can certainly help you. I think because we got to end in a couple minutes. But I think he's more talking about the. Well, I guess because then we just put the scale.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like when you've got your top here. So here's flex, and here's all the positions. Yeah. So we've got the default instance op, and so we would also want to put this under as this. So I haven't done this yet, but it's going to be something similar to this, where we've got this. This anisotropy scale, because really that's all it is. The only reason why it's called anisotropy is because it's not scaled uniformly. Like, it's anisotropic, so it's scaled in XYZ separately. and that's all it means. And
then you just
so
put
then here it would be something
RGB
like
channels.
Yeah, so this isn't going to work right now because there's some other.
But also, if you put the
test,
XYZ as RGB, does it end up working? Because we didn't assign our XYZ channels.
No, the problem is that we don't have an output here for some reason. So we should be seeing something that looks similar to this top wall of positions, and because we're not, it isn't working. But this is more or less how you would do it. Is you would select RGB here for scale in XYZ as opposed to the positions you would select.
But they would
RGB
be coming off the flex,
translate.
Off the flex one, that is.
Yeah, and I guess you could do something more like this, and you probably want to name it positions, something like that. And you could, I don't know. I mean, the anisotropy thing I think just throws people off as a word anyway. It was just something that NVIDIA wanted to call it for their research paper. Just looks better in the academia community.
So Pablo, I hope that helps get you at least started on the right path. I think as long as Landon has mentioned, you're getting an output from the anisotropy texture, then you just assign those to your scale of the instancing, and hopefully from there, you're in Success Town.
Yeah, and the only thing that we're missing here is probably some option on the Flex Solver to make this work.
Yeah, to like enable the texture or something.
So there's something I'm missing. Yeah, just because I'm not seeing it right now, but maybe I have to reinitialize the sim.
Yeah, and I also haven't played with this anisotropy texture either, so I'm not an expert on it either. We got two dudes bumbling around, and because we also messed with the sim size, didn't we? The bucket.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I just had to reinitialize the sim. So we're not going to get like a full end-to-end thing.
Assign your XYZs,
here yet, but yeah, that's.
Did it do it?
That's basically the idea. I don't know.
Yeah, why does it all look janky? Hopefully this gets you going on the right direction, Pablo, because we do have to wrap up now. Let me see if I can get us. Let me see if you're back on. Skype is really not happy about that switch that you did on them. If you pull up your camera, if you pull up the camera on your shared screen, though, that's me.
Like in.
Yeah, or like Skype? Whatever. Yeah, like you just pull up your camera on the screen, like even in a.
Oh, you're saying this is the only way that people can see me right now.
Screen. So hold on, position yourself like.
Gotcha.
Yeah, just leave it there. I'll put myself somewhere relatively appealing.
So that way we can.
So, thanks folks for joining. This is like so crazy. Are you watching the YouTube? Go to the YouTube and just look how hilarious this looks while I do the outro. But thanks folks for joining us. We had a lot of fun talking to Landon today. Landon Thomas is a super deep TouchDesign developer. Also now working a lot with Unity, Shader Graph, VFX Graph. Landon, do you have your social posts that once you get to the YouTube, if you want to just put them into the chat, or if you send them to me on Skype chat, I'll throw them into the chat here as well.
Okay.
Oh, you're moving. Oh, yeah, you're moving. I see. Yeah, you got to do the Skype chat. Okay, yeah, you got to move. Okay, move for a second. I'll cover for us. I'll cover.
Yeah. Just because.
So if you want to see more content like this, smash the like button, subscribe button, all that good stuff on our YouTube channel. Normally we do these kind of things on Twitch, but we decided to give it a shot today on our YouTube channel. Are we like chasing each other's cameras? I think we're chasing each other's cameras. So you should also check out our YouTube page. We've got tons of content for TouchDesigner and Notch on there, as well as just general interactive immersive goodness. Landon is going to post his social links into the chat here for your viewing pleasures. I highly suggest following him. He's doing a lot of really cool stuff. Is always doing stuff that I'm like, oh, cool, interesting. Like I've never heard of that before. So if you're into that kind of vibe, Landon's social channels are the place to go to. And you're bringing up Unity again.
Yeah, just to have something flashy.
Look at that. There's something flashy. So with that said, folks, thanks again for joining us. We'll see you on the next one. If you do want to know when these are happening and whether they're happening here on Twitch or on YouTube, I'll put a link in the chat right now. Best way to do that is to sign up for our newsletter, which actually is getting a pretty cool overhaul on Monday. So sign up for that because it's got blog content, YouTube videos, and any announcements about what we're up to. Let me put this link in the chat here. Oh boy. If you scroll down a little bit, on the right side is a newsletter sign-up form. Hit that and all will be well. So with that said, thanks to everybody for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one. Actually, you know what, Landon, is there any last words you want to...
Well,
do you want to leave it? Oh, you didn't even put the chat yet.
Yeah, that's
okay,
what
hold
I'm
on.
doing
No, don't
now.
worry. We're chilling. We're not going anywhere.
So I'm not on the YouTube chat. So if you can put it in
Are
there
you putting
for
it
me.
in the? You're putting it in the Skype chat. I'll copy and paste it for you.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to get some lunch.
I don't even have a link to the YouTube feed. I don't even know. Like, you didn't post it on the TouchDesigner Discord.
Hey, listen. This is, don't get salty at me. Give me them links. Okay, so this is Landon's website. I'm throwing it into the chat now.
Which has like a broken link to my Instagram. So I'll give you.
That's fantastic. That's a good way to leave everything. Broken links. I'm going to cover the Skype. I'm going top left to cover the Skype logo. Here's Landon's Instagram coming at you. Follow him on there.
I'll also post the Twitter for the game.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool. I think people will be into it.
For Divenheim.
Looks like a cool game. Check that out. Follow them, and you can also see some of Landon's work getting into there as well. Landon, is there anything else you want to leave the folks with? Last thought or anything?
No, I don't really. I've kind of got nothing. It's just. But thank you. I guess thank you. If you're watching this now or you're watching a recording later. Thanks for looking. Checking this out and looking into what I'm working on.
Cool. Well, thank you again for joining us, my friend. It's always a pleasure chatting.
Yeah. And watch out in the next newsletter.
Well, don't give them the. I don't know. It's not gonna be the next one. The next one doesn't have it. It might be in the next few.
A future one.
Yeah, in the next very soon.
Like,
Landon's filter top. Don't worry. We'll. What is it? Ship it.
Yeah,
what do you? No. What do you call it? Chip it and ship it. There's a thing. What's the expression?
I don't know.
Clip it and ship it. I clip it and ship it. I think. Clip it and ship it. Let's clip it and ship it.
Okay, but yeah, it's soon, but not necessarily the next one.
Exactly. Cool. So thanks everyone for coming and checking it out. We'll catch you in the next live stream.
Thanks everybody.